Yesterday, the world may have ended, not with fire, not with war, not with the thunder of collapsing cities or the silence of empty skies. Instead, it may have ended quietly, so quietly that not a single person noticed. Except you. People are still walking the streets, trains still run on time, news channels still debate politics. Your phone still lights up with notifications that feel ordinary, yet something feels slightly off. A familiar street looks just a little different. A conversation repeats itself in an odd way. A memory you were certain of suddenly doesn't match reality. And then the question arrives. The kind of question that once planted never leaves your mind. What if the world truly ended yesterday, and this is something else? Not an apocalypse, a replacement, a continuation, a perfect imitation. Throughout history, humans have feared the end of the world, but rarely have we asked the far stranger question. What if the end already happened and we simply kept going? Stay with me, because the deeper we go into history, philosophy, science, and the strange mysteries of human perception, the more unsettling this possibility becomes. Before we step deeper into this strange idea, take a second. If you're enjoying thought-provoking stories like this, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from or what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see people from all over the world thinking about the same questions at the same moment. Now, let's begin the journey. The morning begins the way most mornings do. A faint glow of light slips through the curtains, slowly pushing away the darkness of night. The world outside is already awake. Somewhere a bus sighs to a stop. A distant horn echoes through the street. Someone's alarm rings in the apartment next door. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. You wake up, stretch, and reach for your phone the way millions of people do every morning. The screen lights up. Notifications appear. News headlines scroll past. Everything seems normal. And yet for a brief moment, so brief it almost disappears before you can hold on to it, there is a strange feeling in your chest. Something is different. You can't explain it. You can't prove it. But your mind lingers on the sensation like a word that sits on the tip of your tongue. You walk to the window and look outside. Cars move through the streets in quiet rhythm. A man crosses the road with a cup of tea in his hand. A dog pulls impatiently at its leash as its owner struggles to keep up. A fruit vendor arranges oranges in careful rows. The same scene you might have seen yesterday. But what if yesterday never actually continued? What if yesterday was the last true day of the world as it once existed, and what you're seeing now is something that looks exactly the same, but isn't? The idea sounds absurd at first, almost childish, like the premise of a science fiction film you might forget about after the credits roll. But when you examine the mechanics of perception, the way the human brain constructs reality, a strange truth emerges. You do not experience the world directly. Your brain does not see reality the way a camera sees a photograph. Instead, it receives fragments of information from your senses, light, sound, pressure, temperature, and builds a model of the world inside your mind, a simulation created by your own brain. Every color you see, every sound you hear, every memory you trust, exists only as electrical signals interpreted inside a small network of neurons in your skull. Which means something deeply unsettling. If reality changed overnight, completely and perfectly, your brain might never detect it. Imagine for a moment that sometime yesterday, at exactly 11:59 p.m., the entire universe simply stopped. Not exploded, not collapsed, just ended. Every star vanished, every planet disappeared, every atom dissolved into silence. For a fraction of time so small it cannot even be measured. And then something replaced it. A universe identical in every detail. Every building rebuilt, atom by atom,
Every person recreated with the same memories, the same personalities, the same unfinished conversations. Even the coffee cup you left on your table last night, still holding the same faint stain at the bottom. If that happened, what evidence would exist? Your memories would tell you that yesterday continued normally. Your surroundings would confirm it. Your friends would remember the same events. Your phone would still contain yesterday's messages. Everything would appear seamless. And yet the original world would be gone forever. It sounds impossible, but philosophers have been exploring versions of this idea for centuries. One of the earliest forms appears in a simple thought experiment: the world created 5 minutes ago. Imagine that the universe, with all its stars, galaxies, and ancient fossils, was created only 5 minutes ago. But it was created with built-in memories. Your childhood memories, history books describing ancient civilizations, photographs of events that never truly occurred. In that scenario, every piece of evidence suggesting a long past would exist, even though the past itself never happened. There would be absolutely no way to prove otherwise. The unsettling truth is that we trust our memories because we must, not because they are perfect records of reality. And history itself offers strange examples of how fragile memory can be. Think about how often people confidently remember events that never occurred. Entire groups of people recall the same movie quote differently. Millions remember historical details incorrectly. Witnesses to the same event often describe completely different versions of what happened. Our brains are not perfect recorders of the past. They are storytellers. They reconstruct the past every time we remember it, which means the line between memory and imagination is far thinner than most people realize. But the deeper question is not about memory alone. It's about continuity. Human consciousness relies on the feeling that time flows smoothly from one moment to the next. Yesterday leads into today, today leads into tomorrow. But what if that flow is only an illusion created by memory? What if time itself can reset, silently, while leaving the illusion of continuity intact? This is not just philosophy anymore. Modern physics has begun exploring ideas that sound eerily similar. Some theories suggest the universe may not be as stable as we assume, that reality itself could shift between different states, much like water turning into ice. If such a shift occurred, it might happen instantly. No warning, no visible explosion, just a transition from one version of the universe to another. And if the new universe preserved the same physical structure, no one inside it would notice. No alarm would sound, no historian would record the event. Life would simply continue as if nothing had happened. And yet everything would be new. For most people, this idea fades quickly. The mind rejects it because it feels too strange, too distant from everyday experience. But occasionally, something happens that makes the thought return. You walk through a place you've known for years, and something feels subtly wrong. A building seems slightly different. A memory doesn't match what you see. A conversation takes an unexpected turn that feels oddly familiar, like it has happened before. Psychologists call these moments cognitive dissonance or false recognition, your brain trying to reconcile conflicting pieces of information. But what once in a while, those moments are not errors in memory, but cracks in continuity, tiny hints that the world we remember and the world we inhabit are not perfectly aligned. Most of the time, our minds smooth over those cracks instantly. We explain them away, we assume we misremembered, because the alternative, that reality itself might shift without warning, is almost impossible to accept. And yet, if the world truly ended yesterday and restarted perfectly today, our brains would do exactly what they are doing right now. They would assume everything is normal. You would drink your coffee, you would scroll through your phone, you would step outside and begin another ordinary day, completely unaware that the universe you once lived in no longer exists. But here's where the story becomes even stranger, because throughout human history, entire civilizations believed something very similar had already happened. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Ancient cultures across the world told stories of earlier worlds that had been destroyed and replaced, not once, but many times. According to their myths, humanity was not living in the first version of reality. We were living in one of many, and those earlier worlds had ended suddenly, leaving only faint echoes in stories and legends. At first glance, these myths seem like poetic explanations for natural disasters, but when we examine them more closely, a disturbing pattern begins to appear. Because culture is separated by oceans, by centuries, and by languages, all describe something eerily similar. They believe the world had ended before, and that the one we live in now is simply the latest version.
Long before telescopes scanned the skies or a satellite circled the planet, human beings were already asking a question that sounds strangely modern. What if this world is not the first one? Across continents and across centuries, ancient civilizations told stories that seemed to echo the same haunting idea. The world had already been destroyed once before, and humanity was living in what came after. These were not small myths told around fires. They were central to entire civilizations, woven into their religions, calendars, temples, and understanding of time itself. And the deeper you explore these stories, the stranger they become. Because again and again, cultures that never contacted each other described multiple worlds, each ending suddenly before a new one began, almost as if reality itself had restarted. One of the most famous examples comes from the ancient Aztecs of Mesoamerica. According to Aztec cosmology, the universe had not existed forever in a single form. Instead, the world had passed through 5 different eras, each called a sun. Each sun represented a complete version of the world, and each one had ended in catastrophe. The first sun ended when jaguars devoured humanity. The second sun ended when violent winds destroyed the earth. The third sun ended in a rain of fire. The fourth sun ended in floods so immense that the world drowned. And the Aztecs believed they were living under the fifth sun, the final world, a fragile era that would one day collapse as well. To modern readers, these stories often sound symbolic, mythological explanations for natural disasters. But what makes them fascinating is how deeply the Aztecs believed them. Their calendars, rituals, and architecture were built around the fear that the current world could end suddenly, just like the ones before it. Their famous calendar stone was not just a timekeeping device, it was a warning, a reminder that previous worlds had already vanished. But the Aztecs were not alone in thinking this way. Halfway across the planet, ancient Hindu philosophy describes something eerily similar. In Hindu cosmology, time does not move in a straight line. Instead, the universe moves through endless cycles called yugas. Each cycle begins with a golden age of harmony and slowly declines into chaos before the universe is destroyed and reborn again. These cycles stretch across millions of years. Entire worlds appear, civilizations rise, humanity forgets its origins, and then everything resets. The universe collapses, only to begin again. This cosmic cycle is known as samsara, the endless turning of existence. And according to these ancient texts, our current world is not even close to the first one. We are living deep inside a repeating pattern of creation and destruction. The idea is so vast that it almost feels impossible to grasp. Yet when these beliefs first appeared thousands of years ago, they were accepted as the natural structure of reality. And once again, we find the same unsettling theme. The world you see around you may not be the original. It may simply be the latest version. If we move north to ancient Scandinavia, another version of the story appears. In Norse mythology, the gods themselves knew that the world would one day end in a catastrophic event called Ragnarok. But Ragnarok was not the absolute end of existence. After the destruction of the gods, after the collapse of the earth and sky, something remarkable would happen.
The world would rise again. A new earth would emerge from the sea. The sun would return. And a handful of surviving humans would repopulate the world. A new civilization would begin, a fresh chapter of reality. In other words, even in Norse mythology, the end of the world was not the end of existence. It was a reset. If we continue exploring ancient beliefs, the pattern becomes even clearer. The ancient Greeks told a similar story through the writings of the poet Hesiod. He described the history of humanity as a sequence of 5 ages: gold, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron. Each age represented a different version of humanity. The Golden Age was peaceful and harmonious. But with each passing age, humanity became more violent, more corrupt, more distant from the divine, eventually leading to the harsh and troubled world we inhabit now, the Iron Age. Once again, humanity was not living in the first world. We were living in the latest stage of a long decline. When historians compare these myths, something curious emerges. These civilizations had no way of communicating with each other, no internet, no shared scientific frameworks. Yet somehow many of them arrived at the same basic structure of reality. The world begins, the world declines, the world ends, and then the world begins again, over and over. At first glance, this might simply reflect the natural cycles humans observe in nature: day and night, summer and winter, birth and death. But the scale of these myths goes far beyond natural cycles. They describe entire universes resetting, entire versions of reality ending and beginning again. And here is where things become unsettling.
Because modern science, in a completely different way, has begun considering ideas that sound strangely similar. Cosmologists studying the origin of the universe have discovered that the Big Bang may not have been the beginning of everything. Some theories suggest it may have been just one event in an endless cycle of universes. A collapse followed by an expansion, a cosmic reset, again and again. Other theories propose something even stranger, the possibility that multiple universes may exist simultaneously, each with different versions of reality. Some scientists call this the multiverse. In such a framework, entire universes could appear and disappear without affecting others. Reality itself might be far less stable than it appears. Which brings us back to a strange and uncomfortable possibility. Ancient civilizations may not have been describing literal cosmic events in the scientific sense, but they were grappling with an intuition that humans seem to carry across cultures and eras. The feeling that reality is not permanent, that the world we know could vanish and be replaced, and we might never know it happened. Of course, modern historians usually interpret these myths symbolically, stories that helped ancient people cope with disaster, uncertainty, and the fear of death. But sometimes myths preserve deeper truths, not literal facts, but powerful ideas about the nature of existence. Ideas that return again and again in human thought. And the idea that the world could end silently, without warning, only to begin again, is one of the oldest ideas humanity has ever imagined. Yet ancient myths raise an even stranger question. If worlds truly ended and began again throughout history, why would no one remember the earlier ones? Why would every civilization believe they were living in the current world, but none possess clear evidence of the previous ones? The answer may lie in something far closer to home than ancient mythology. Something that shapes every moment of your life. Something so fragile that even a small change could alter your entire understanding of reality. Your memory. Because the human brain does not record the past like a perfect archive. It rebuilds it. Every time. And sometimes, the past people remember does not match the world that exists around them anymore. In the modern era, this strange mismatch has a name. And once you learn about it, you may start noticing it everywhere. It's called the Mandela Effect.
In 2009, a woman named Fiona Broom attended a conference discussing strange and unexplained experiences. During a casual conversation, she mentioned something she was absolutely certain about. She remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison during the 1980s. She could recall the news coverage, she remembered the mourning crowds, she even believed she had seen the funeral broadcast on television. But there was one problem. None of that had ever happened. Mandela had not died in prison. In fact, he was released from prison in 1990 and later became the president of South Africa, remaining a global figure until his death in 2013. At first, it seemed like a simple memory mistake. But then something strange happened. Other people in the conversation said they remembered the same thing. Not vaguely, clearly. They remembered news reports, speeches, and public reactions that never existed. And when Fiona Broom later discussed the topic online, thousands of people reported identical memories of events that had never happened in recorded history. That strange collective false memory eventually became known as the Mandela Effect. At first, psychologists treated it as an interesting curiosity, an example of how human memory can distort over time. But as more examples surfaced, the phenomenon became increasingly unsettling, because it wasn't just about one historical event. It seemed to appear everywhere. For example, many people vividly remember a famous movie line spoken by Darth Vader in the film Star Wars, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Millions remember the line as, "Luke, I am your father." It has been quoted that way in conversations, parodies, and pop culture for decades. Yet when you watch the original film, the line is different. Darth Vader actually says, "No, I am your father." The name Luke is never spoken in that moment. Another example appears in the classic children's book series, The Berenstain Bears. Ask people how the name is spelled, and many will confidently say Berenstain Bears. The pronunciation seems to match, the spelling feels familiar, but the books have always been spelled Berenstain with an A, not an E. Then there is the famous board game Monopoly. Many people remember the character on the game box, Rich Uncle Pennybags, wearing a monocle. It feels right, it matches the image in our minds, except he has never worn a monocle, not in any official version of the game.
Over time, hundreds of similar examples have appeared. Movie lines remembered incorrectly, logos that seem slightly different, historical details that large groups of people recall in the same mistaken way. Most scientists offer a reasonable explanation. Human memory is reconstructive. When we remember something, we do not replay a perfect recording. Instead, our brains rebuild the memory using fragments of information, expectations, and cultural influence. Sometimes those reconstructions drift slightly away from reality.
If enough people make the same assumption, a shared false memory can emerge. In other words, the Mandela Effect is usually explained as a psychological illusion. But the reason it fascinates people is that it triggers a deeper, more unsettling question. Why do these memory differences sometimes feel so vivid, so convincing, so emotionally certain? Many people experiencing these moments describe a strange sensation, the feeling that something about reality itself has shifted slightly. Of course, from a scientific standpoint, that explanation seems unnecessary. Memory errors are extremely common. Our brains prioritize efficiency over accuracy. But the Mandela Effect reveals something important. The past you remember is not necessarily the past that actually happened. And if enough people share the same reconstructed memory, it can feel just as real as documented history, which raises a disturbing possibility. If the world truly changed in a subtle way, if reality itself shifted, how would we distinguish that from a simple memory error? Imagine a scenario where the universe resets overnight. The world is recreated almost perfectly, but a few tiny details are slightly different. A logo changes, a line in a movie shifts, a historical event unfolds differently. Would we interpret that as evidence of a new reality, or would we simply assume we misremembered? The human brain is incredibly skilled at protecting its sense of stability. When confronted with conflicting information, it usually chooses the explanation that preserves a coherent story of the world, which means the simplest answer almost always wins. We forgot, we misunderstood, we remembered incorrectly, and most of the time, those explanations are probably correct. But occasionally, something strange happens. A memory resurfaces that feels too clear to dismiss. A childhood detail that no longer matches the present. A photograph that seems different from how you remember it. Moments like these usually fade quickly. We shrug and move on, because questioning the stability of reality itself is deeply uncomfortable. But the Mandela Effect demonstrates something important. Our experience of the world is not a direct window into reality. It is a story our brain tells us about reality. And stories can change. Historians know this well. Entire societies have rewritten their histories many times. Events that were once considered certain later become disputed. Documents disappear, new evidence emerges, the past itself seems to shift under our feet. But memory errors and cultural storytelling may only explain part of the mystery, because modern physics has begun exploring a possibility far stranger than collective memory mistakes, a possibility that suggests the universe itself might not be as stable as it appears. There may exist processes hidden deep within the laws of physics that could alter reality instantly, not gradually, not over centuries, but in a single moment. If such a shift occurred, it might happen faster than the human brain could ever detect. No explosion, no warning, just a silent transformation of the universe itself. Physicists studying the fundamental structure of reality call one of these possibilities vacuum decay, and if it ever happened, the universe you know could disappear faster than the blink of an eye, replaced by something completely different. Yet from inside that new universe, life might continue as if nothing had changed, and no one would ever know the previous world had existed at all.
For most of human history, the universe was imagined as something solid and permanent. The sky above seemed eternal. The stars appeared fixed. The laws of nature felt stable and predictable. Even when civilizations believed the world might end, they usually imagined dramatic catastrophes, floods, fire, earthquakes, or divine judgment. But modern physics has quietly introduced a far stranger possibility. The universe might not be stable at all. In fact, according to some theories, the entire structure of reality may exist in a delicate balance, one that could shift instantly under the right conditions. Not gradually, not with warning, but in a single, silent moment. To understand this possibility, we have to begin with something physicists call the quantum vacuum. The word vacuum usually makes us think of empty space, a vast nothingness between stars.
But in quantum physics, empty space is anything but empty. Even in regions where there are no atoms, no light, and no particles, space itself still contains energy. Invisible quantum fields fluctuate constantly, creating tiny bursts of activity that appear and disappear in fractions of a second. Particles pop into existence and vanish again. Energy flickers like static beneath the surface of reality. What we call empty space is actually a restless ocean of invisible forces. Now imagine that this quantum vacuum, the foundation of our universe, can exist in different states. Similar to how water can exist as liquid, ice, or vapor depending on its energy level. Physicists believe the vacuum state of our universe might not be the lowest possible energy state. Instead, it may be a metastable state, stable for now, but not the true ground level. Think of it like a ball resting in a shallow valley on a mountain. It looks stable. It may remain there for millions or billions of years, but if something nudges it just enough, the ball could roll into a deeper valley below. Once that happens, there is no going back. In physics, that hypothetical transition is known as vacuum decay. If the universe ever shifted into a lower energy vacuum state, the laws of physics themselves would change. The fundamental constants that govern matter, light, and chemistry could be different. Atoms might not exist the same way. Stars might burn differently, or not at all. Reality as we know it would instantly transform. But the most unsettling part is not the transformation itself, it's how it would happen. Vacuum decay would begin with a tiny region of space transitioning into the new state. A bubble of altered physics would form, smaller than an atom at first. Then that bubble would begin expanding outward at nearly the speed of light. Anything it touched would instantly convert into the new vacuum state. The atoms of your body, the structure of the Earth, the stars and distant galaxies, everything would be transformed as the bubble passed through. And because the boundary moves at the speed of light, there would be no way to see it coming. No signal could travel ahead of it. No warning could reach us. One moment, the universe would exist as we know it. The next moment, it would be something else, completely different. Physicists sometimes describe this scenario as the ultimate cosmic reset. But here is where the idea becomes truly strange, because from a certain perspective, such a transition might not even look like destruction. If the new vacuum state still allowed matter and energy to exist in similar forms, the resulting universe might resemble the old one in many ways. Stars could still shine, planets could still orbit, life might even be possible again. But the deeper structure of reality would be fundamentally different, and anyone existing inside that new universe would have no memory of the previous one. From their perspective, the universe would appear perfectly normal. It would have always been that way. The previous version of reality would be completely erased. To be clear, physicists are not claiming this event has occurred. Vacuum decay is a theoretical possibility, a prediction emerging from certain interpretations of quantum field theory, and the chances of it happening during our lifetime are believed to be extremely small, perhaps unimaginably small. Yet the idea reveals something profound about the nature of the universe. Reality is not necessarily permanent. It may exist in states that can change, states that can transition suddenly, without warning. The universe we inhabit may simply be one configuration among many possible ones. And if such a transition ever occurred, it would be impossible for observers inside the system to detect the previous version. History itself would reset. Every measurement, every record, every memory would belong to the new state. Which raises an unsettling philosophical question. If reality changed in a way that preserved continuity, the appearance of an unbroken timeline, would the concept of destruction even apply? Or would it simply be another version of existence taking the place of the old one? To an outside observer, the previous universe would be gone. But to anyone living inside the new one, nothing unusual would seem to have happened at all. Morning would still arrive, people would still wake up, cities would still hum with activity. Life would continue with the same quiet rhythms as the day before, exactly like the morning we imagined earlier. A normal morning. Coffee brewing, traffic moving, the faint sensation that something feels slightly different. But physics is not the only field that has explored ideas like this. Philosophers have long wrestled with an even more unsettling possibility. What if the universe could be replaced perfectly, atom by atom, without anyone noticing? If every particle were recreated in the exact same arrangement, would the new world truly be different? Or would it be indistinguishable from the original? And if no observer could detect the difference, would the distinction even matter? This question leads us directly into one of the deepest puzzles in philosophy.
a thought experiment about identity, continuity, and the nature of existence itself. Because if the universe were replaced overnight with a perfect copy, you might wake up tomorrow feeling exactly the same, with the same memories, the same personality, the same unfinished thoughts from yesterday. But the version of you that lived yesterday would be gone forever. And the person drinking coffee this morning would simply be the next version.
Imagine walking into a room and seeing an object you've known your entire life, a wooden chair. The same chair that has been in your home for years. The scratches on its legs, the faint dent in the seat, the slight creak it makes when someone sits down, every detail familiar. Now imagine that sometime during the night, while you were asleep, that chair was quietly removed from existence. Not broken, not moved, completely erased. And then, in the exact same place, another chair was created, atom by atom, molecule by molecule, every scratch and dent copied perfectly. To your eyes, it would look identical. To your touch, it would feel identical. To every scientific instrument on Earth, it would measure the same. There would be absolutely no difference you could detect. Yet the original chair, the one that existed yesterday, would no longer exist. What sits in front of you now would be a perfect duplicate. Philosophers have explored versions of this idea for centuries. One of the most famous examples is a thought experiment known as Ship of Theseus. The story begins with an ancient ship that slowly deteriorates over time. As its wooden planks rot, they are replaced one by one with new boards. Eventually, every piece of the ship has been replaced. Yet the ship still looks the same. It sails the same seas, people still call it by the same name. The question is simple but unsettling. Is it still the same ship? If every part of an object is gradually replaced, at what point does it become something new? This paradox fascinated thinkers as far back as Plutarch, who wrote about the problem nearly 2,000 years ago. But the puzzle becomes even more disturbing when applied not to ships, but to people. Your body is constantly replacing itself. Cells die and are replaced every day. Skin regenerates, blood renews itself. Even parts of your skeleton gradually rebuild over time. Within several years, most of the atoms that make up your body today will no longer be the same atoms you had in the past. And yet you still feel like the same person. Your memories connect your past to your present, creating the sense of a continuous identity. But what if that continuity is only psychological? What if identity is simply the story your brain tells about persistence over time? To push the idea further, philosophers created another famous thought experiment, the teleportation paradox. Imagine stepping into a futuristic teleportation machine. The device scans your body down to the atomic level, recording the exact position of every particle. Then it destroys your original body and sends the information to another location where a new body is assembled atom by atom in the exact same arrangement. When the process finishes, a person steps out of the receiving machine. They look like you, they speak like you, they remember your childhood, your friends, your favorite music, your unfinished plans for tomorrow. To everyone else, the person who stepped out is you. But the question remains, is that truly you? Or is it simply a copy, a perfect continuation of your memories and personality? If the original body was destroyed during the teleportation process, did you survive the journey? Or did you die while a perfect duplicate continued living your life? Most people find this question deeply uncomfortable because it challenges one of our most basic assumptions, the idea that personal identity is continuous and stable. But the puzzle becomes even more unsettling when applied not to ships, but to the entire universe. Imagine that sometime yesterday, the universe was destroyed. Every atom vanished, every star disappeared, but instantly afterward, a new universe appeared, identical in every detail. Every city recreated, every person rebuilt with the same memories, every historical record preserved. From the inside, it would look exactly like the same universe continuing forward. But from a philosophical perspective, the original universe would be gone. What remained would be a perfect reconstruction. Now here's the key question. Would anyone inside that reconstructed universe be able to detect the difference? The answer seems to be no. Your memories would still tell you that yesterday happened. Your environment would confirm those memories. Every piece of evidence would support the illusion of continuity. There would be no gap in time, no missing data, no sign that reality had ever paused.
From your perspective, nothing unusual would have occurred, yet the original universe would be permanently lost. This idea may sound purely philosophical, but it touches something deeply connected to the nature of consciousness itself. What makes you, you? Is it the physical atoms that make up your body? Or is it the pattern those atoms create, the structure of your mind? If identity is defined by pattern rather than material, then a perfect copy might truly be indistinguishable from the original. But if identity depends on physical continuity, the unbroken chain of existence, then even a perfect duplicate would not be the same being. The original would still be gone. This dilemma has no easy answer. Philosophers have debated it for centuries without reaching a final conclusion. But it reveals something unsettling about our assumptions regarding existence. The world feels continuous because our memories create that illusion. Our brains connect yesterday to today to tomorrow. But the deeper structure of reality may not be obligated to preserve that continuity. If the universe were replaced overnight with an identical version, the illusion of continuity would remain perfectly intact. Life would continue as if nothing had happened. You would wake up. You would make coffee. You would step outside into the same familiar streets. And you would carry with you the same memories of yesterday, even if yesterday belonged to a universe that no longer exists. But philosophers are not the only ones exploring this possibility anymore. In recent decades, some scientists and technologists have begun considering an even stranger idea. What if the universe does not simply behave like a system that could reset? What if it actually is a system, a vast computational process, something more like a program than a traditional physical reality? If that were true, then the universe might possess something every program has: a beginning, a structure, and perhaps a restart button. This possibility leads directly into one of the most provocative ideas in modern science and philosophy: the possibility that reality itself may be a simulation. And if simulations can be restarted, updated, or replaced, then the question becomes unavoidable. What if the world didn't end in fire or silence yesterday? What if someone simply pressed reset?
In 2003, a philosopher at the University of Oxford published a paper that quietly ignited one of the strangest debates in modern science. His name was Nick Bostrom, and the argument he presented was both simple and deeply unsettling. If advanced civilizations continue to develop powerful computing technology, they may eventually be capable of simulating entire universes, not small environments like video games, but complete realities with galaxies, planets, ecosystems, and conscious beings living inside them. These simulations could be built for research, for curiosity, for entertainment, or for reasons we cannot even imagine. And if such simulations were possible, there might not be just one. There could be millions, billions, perhaps even trillions. Now consider the implication. If intelligent civilizations create large numbers of simulated universes, then statistically speaking, most conscious beings might exist inside simulations rather than in the original physical universe. In other words, the chances that we are living in the base reality, the original universe, could actually be extremely small. This idea became known as the simulation hypothesis. At first, it sounded like pure science fiction, something more suited to movies than academic discussion. Yet the logic behind it is surprisingly difficult to dismiss. Think about the progress of computing in just the last few decades. Early computers could barely display simple text. Today, complex virtual worlds exist inside video games, environments with weather systems, ecosystems, physics engines, and millions of players interacting in real time. Each year, the scale and realism of these digital environments increases. Artificial intelligence now creates characters capable of conversation, decision-making, and learning. If this trend continues for centuries or even thousands of years, the computational power available to future civilizations could be almost unimaginable. Simulating an entire planet might become trivial. Simulating an entire universe might eventually be possible. And if that happened, those simulated worlds could contain conscious beings who believe their reality is genuine, beings who look at the stars, who write books, who ask questions about the nature of existence, beings exactly like us. The unsettling possibility is that we might be among them. This concept has attracted attention from physicists, philosophers, and technologists alike. Even some prominent scientists have admitted that the idea cannot be easily dismissed. Among them is the theoretical physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, who once remarked that the probability we are living in base reality might be surprisingly small. Meanwhile, entrepreneur Elon Musk famously argued that if technological progress continues, the odds of living in the original universe could be 1 in billions. Of course, these statements are speculative. No one has definitive evidence that reality is a simulation, but the idea forces us to reconsider something important. If the universe is simulated, then it operates according to rules written by something outside the system, just like any software program. And software programs share certain properties. They can be started, they can be paused,
they can be modified, and sometimes they can be restarted. Imagine a vast simulation running somewhere far beyond the boundaries of our universe. Inside that simulation exists a digital cosmos filled with galaxies and civilizations. Time flows, history unfolds, generations live and die. From inside the system, everything appears natural, but outside the system, the entire universe exists as a computational process, lines of code, streams of data. Now imagine that the operators of this simulation decide to restart the system. Perhaps they want to fix an error. Perhaps they want to run a different experiment. Perhaps they simply want to observe how the universe evolves from a slightly different starting point. With a single command, the simulation resets. From the perspective of those inside the system, the transition would be invisible. Their memories would continue. Their history would remain intact. Every record and every object would reappear exactly as before. The world would look the same, but technically the universe would have started again. The previous version would be gone, replaced by a new instance of the same simulation, and no one inside it would ever know. This idea may sound far removed from reality, but interestingly, certain aspects of modern physics already resemble computational structures. For example, some physicists have noted that the universe appears to have discrete limits, smallest possible units of space and time. Space may be divided into tiny units called Planck lengths. Time may tick forward in Planck intervals, almost like pixels and frames in a digital system. Other researchers have explored whether the laws of physics behave similarly to information processing rules. Matter can be described as information. Energy can be converted into data-like structures. Even black holes appear to store information on their surfaces in ways that resemble data storage. None of this proves the universe is a simulation, but it reveals something fascinating. The deeper we explore reality, the more it sometimes resembles an information system rather than a traditional mechanical structure. And information systems can be copied, saved, restarted. If the universe truly operates like a computational process, then the concept of a cosmic reset becomes far less mysterious. It becomes a technical possibility, a reboot, a reload. The universe yesterday might have been one instance of the simulation. Today might be another. Everything appears the same because the new instance was loaded with the same data. Your memories, your environment, your history. From your perspective, nothing changed. But from outside the system, the entire universe may have just started running again. Of course, there is currently no evidence that anyone is operating such a simulation. And even if we were inside one, detecting the boundary between simulation and base reality might be impossible. Any evidence could simply be part of the simulation itself. Yet the simulation hypothesis introduces an unsettling new angle to our original question. If the world ended yesterday, not through destruction, but through a reset, the evidence might be impossible to detect from inside the system. But sometimes systems reveal subtle hints when they restart. Tiny anomalies, unexpected patterns, moments when the behavior of the system seems slightly unusual. And throughout history, humanity has occasionally experienced moments that feel strangely out of place. Moments when reality itself seems to bend slightly. Coincidences too perfect, events too improbable, patterns too precise to ignore. Most of the time we dismiss them as chance. But what if, just occasionally, they are traces of something deeper? Tiny clues that the universe is not as continuous as we believe. Hints that reality may have been reset more than once, and that somewhere within the ordinary flow of history, a few small signs may still remain.
History is often presented as a clean sequence of events. Dates follow dates. Empires rise and fall. Discoveries appear exactly when they are supposed to. When we look at textbooks, the past feels orderly, almost inevitable, as if every event led smoothly into the next. But when historians look closer, the story of human civilization becomes far stranger, because scattered throughout history are moments that feel almost improbable. Moments when events align with such precision, they seem less like accidents and more like perfectly arranged pieces of a puzzle. At first glance, these coincidences appear harmless, interesting footnotes in the story of the world. But when enough of them accumulate, they begin to provoke a strange thought. What if history sometimes feels scripted because in some way we don't understand, it actually is? Consider the year 1914. Europe had spent decades drifting toward tension. Rival empires were armed, alliances were fragile, and national pride was boiling just beneath the surface. Yet war had been avoided again and again. Then one summer morning, a young revolutionary named Gavrilo Princip found himself standing outside a cafe in Sarajevo. Only moments earlier, he believed his mission had failed. He and his fellow conspirators had attempted to assassinate the visiting Archduke of Austria. Their attack had gone wrong, and the royal motorcade had escaped. Defeated, Princip stepped into the street near a small shop. Then something extraordinary happened. The Archduke's driver took a wrong turn. The car slowed down, and suddenly, standing just a few feet away from Princip,
was the man he had failed to kill only minutes before. The target had accidentally driven directly into the assassin's path. Precept fired 2 shots. Those 2 bullets killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife. Within weeks, Europe plunged into World War I. An entire century of global politics would unfold from that moment. Historians often describe the event as tragic coincidence, a wrong turn, a chance encounter. But the precision of that moment still feels uncanny. If the driver had turned 1 street earlier, history might have unfolded completely differently. If Precept had finished his sandwich and left the cafe seconds sooner, he would have missed the car entirely. Yet the alignment occurred perfectly. Moments like this appear again and again in history. Take the story of Alexander Fleming, the scientist who discovered penicillin. In 1928, Fleming returned to his laboratory after a vacation and noticed something strange. One of his petri dishes had been contaminated by mold. Normally, this would ruin an experiment, but Fleming observed that the bacteria surrounding the mold had been destroyed. That contamination led to the discovery of penicillin, the antibiotic that would eventually save millions of lives. The discovery was accidental, a mistake, yet it arrived at exactly the moment when medicine was beginning to explore microbial infections. Without that chance contamination, modern antibiotics might have taken decades longer to develop. Once again, coincidence seems to have nudged history forward at just the right moment. Or consider the chain of events that led to the survival of Adolf Hitler during World War II. In 1939, a carpenter named George Elser planted a bomb in a Munich beer hall where Hitler was scheduled to give a speech. Elser spent months secretly hollowing out a pillar to hide the explosive device. Everything was planned with meticulous precision. The bomb detonated exactly as scheduled, but Hitler had left the building just 13 minutes earlier than expected. The explosion killed several people and destroyed the hall, yet its intended target had already gone. A small change in schedule had altered the course of world history. Moments like these can easily be explained through probability. In a world filled with billions of people and countless ents, improbable coincidences are bound to occur. But sometimes the accumulation of these moments produces a strange feeling, the sense that history occasionally moves along paths so precise that they almost appear guided. Most historians reject that idea entirely. History, they argue, is chaotic, unpredictable, shaped by countless random factors. But if we step back and imagine the possibility we discussed earlier, that reality itself might function like a system, then coincidences take on a different shade of meaning. In complex systems, patterns often emerge. Tiny changes can ripple outward into massive consequences. A small adjustment at the beginning of a process can transform everything that follows. Computer simulations display this behavior constantly. A minor tweak to the initial conditions of a simulated environment can produce completely different outcomes. Entire civilizations inside the simulation might rise or fall depending on the smallest variables. If our universe operates in a similar way, then history might occasionally reveal the fingerprints of those variables, moments when the system shifts slightly, moments when events align in unexpected ways. Of course, that does not mean someone is intentionally guiding history. The patterns could simply emerge naturally from the complexity of reality. But the strange coincidences of history raise an intriguing question. If reality ever restarted, if the universe were reset and run again with slightly different conditions, would the same events occur? Would the same wars begin? Would the same discoveries emerge? Would the same people rise to power? Or would history unfold along completely different paths? In computer simulations, small changes often produce dramatically different results. A slight adjustment in the starting conditions can create an entirely new timeline, which means if reality were restarted yesterday, even with nearly identical conditions, the future might slowly begin to drift away from the past we remember. At first, the differences would be subtle. A conversation that unfolds differently, a decision that changes slightly, a coincidence that no longer occurs. But over years and decades, those tiny variations could accumulate into enormous historical changes. The future would begin to diverge, and no one living inside that new timeline would know the original path had ever existed. Which brings us to the final and most unsettling possibility of all. Because if the world truly ended yesterday and restarted with nearly identical conditions, there is one question we haven't yet asked. What if most people inside this new reality were recreated along with it? Their memories restored, their lives continuing exactly as before. But what if something went slightly wrong? What if one mind, just one, retained fragments of the previous world? Fragments that don't quite match the new one. Memories that feel slightly out of place. Small details that seem just a little different. If that happened, the person experiencing those memories would face a terrifying realization. Everyone else would believe the world had continued normally. History would appear intact. Reality would seem stable. But deep inside their mind would linger the quiet suspicion that something fundamental had changed. That yesterday's world was not the same one they woke up in today. And that suspicion would lead to the final question of our story. The question that transforms this entire thought experiment into something personal. Because the real mystery is not whether the world could end silently and restart. The real mystery is far closer to home. What if it already did?
And the only person who noticed is you.
Imagine waking up tomorrow morning with a strange, unshakable feeling. Nothing dramatic has happened. The sky looks the same, the streets outside your window sound the same. The same routines unfold across the world, people heading to work, trains arriving at stations, news headlines appearing on glowing screens. Everything continues exactly as it always has. And yet something inside you whispers that reality has shifted. Not in a loud or obvious way, not with explosions or broken buildings, but quietly, almost invisibly. You walk through your day searching for evidence that the feeling is wrong. You check the news, you scroll through old photos, you talk with friends about yesterday. Every piece of evidence tells the same story. The world continued normally. Nothing ended, nothing restarted, nothing changed. Everyone remembers the same past, except for one small detail. Something in your own memory doesn't quite match what you see around you. Maybe it's something tiny, a logo that looks slightly different, a line from a film that no longer sounds the way you remember, a building that seems unfamiliar even though you've passed it 100 times. Your brain tries to resolve the contradiction. Perhaps you misremembered. Perhaps your mind is filling in details incorrectly. After all, memory is imperfect. And yet the feeling remains, because what if the explanation is not that your memory is wrong, but that your memory belongs to a different version of the world? If the universe truly restarted, whether through physics, simulation, or some unknown process, then every person inside the new reality would continue with reconstructed memories. History would appear seamless. The timeline would look intact. But if even one mind carried fragments from the previous version of reality, that person might notice subtle mismatches, tiny inconsistencies between memory and the present. Of course, the idea sounds impossible. Human memory is famously unreliable. Psychologists have demonstrated again and again that people can develop extremely vivid memories of events that never occurred. Our minds are storytellers, constantly reconstructing the past to maintain a coherent narrative. So if you ever feel that reality has changed slightly, the simplest explanation is almost always correct. Your memory shifted. Your brain filled in a gap. Nothing supernatural happened. But even if that explanation is true most of the time, the thought experiment itself reveals something fascinating about human consciousness. Your entire experience of reality depends on continuity. Your mind stitches together countless moments, yesterday, last year, childhood, and weaves them into a single narrative called your life. Without that narrative, identity becomes difficult to define. Who you are today is inseparable from the memories you carry from the past. Those memories act like anchors. They convince you that the world you inhabit now is the same one you inhabited yesterday. But imagine that continuity breaking in the smallest possible way. Imagine waking up in a world that looks identical to the one you remember, yet carries subtle differences. You would still function normally. You would still live your life. But somewhere in your mind would linger a quiet suspicion, a question that cannot be proven, a feeling that something once existed which no longer does. Philosophers sometimes describe this idea as a problem of subjective continuity. From the outside, reality might change completely, but from the inside, the flow of consciousness would hide the transition perfectly. The mind would simply continue telling the same story, which means the most reliable witness to reality, your own experience, might also be the easiest thing to deceive. Now step back for a moment and consider the deeper message hidden within this thought experiment. Whether or not the world could actually restart is almost beside the point. The idea forces us to confront something far more personal.
How fragile our understanding of reality truly is. Everything you believe about the past depends on memory. Everything you believe about the world depends on perception. Both of those systems are extraordinary, yet imperfect. They allow us to navigate life, build civilizations, and explore the universe. But they also remind us that certainty is rarer than we like to think. Even historians, the people tasked with preserving the past, constantly revise their understanding of events as new evidence emerges. The story of humanity is not fixed. It evolves. Pieces are added, others are removed. The past itself sometimes appears to change as new discoveries reshape our perspective. In that sense, reality is always slightly unstable, not because the universe restarts, but because our understanding of it does. The world you believed in 10 years ago is not quite the same world you understand today. Your knowledge has grown. Your memories have shifted. Your perspective has changed.
and yet the sense of continuity remains. Your mind quietly edits the story of your life so that everything feels consistent. So perhaps the true lesson hidden in this strange question, what if the world ended yesterday, is not about cosmic resets or simulated universes. It is about awareness, the realization that the world we experience is partly constructed inside our own minds. Every moment of existence is interpreted through perception, memory, and belief, which means the reality you experience is always a collaboration between the universe outside you and the consciousness within you, and that collaboration is constantly evolving. So if the world truly ended yesterday and restarted perfectly today, if history reset without leaving a trace, if reality continued forward with seamless precision, would anything actually feel different? Perhaps not. You would still wake up. You would still feel the warmth of sunlight through your window. You would still hear the distant sounds of the city beginning another day. Life would move forward exactly as it always has. But now, somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet possibility exists. A reminder that the universe might be stranger than it appears, and that the continuity we trust so deeply may be more fragile than we realize. Because the truth is, if the world ended yesterday and a new one began today, there would be almost no way to prove it, except for one small detail, a faint feeling, a subtle doubt, a question that lingers just long enough to make you wonder, what if everything around you is the continuation of a story that technically already ended? And what if the only evidence left of the previous world is the simple fact that you asked the question in the first place? So tonight, when the world grows quiet and the day fades into memory, consider the possibility, not as fear, but as curiosity, because tomorrow morning will arrive just like every morning before it. The sun will rise, people will begin their routines, history will continue unfolding, and if the universe ever does reset, the new world will probably look exactly like this one. Ordinary, familiar, almost normal, just enough to make you believe that nothing ever changed.